I have a question for Dr. Vine, because you preach a powerful sermon. It's two parts. You call it Buyer Beware, part 1 and part 2. I'm going through part 2 right now. And you were going through the history of this, and you made reference to this article that was published in June 27th, 1985. There may be some Seventh-day Adventists who do not know the history of this. Can you take a few seconds to explain from your understanding of what happened there? How did this come about? Did it go through a vote? How come we've never heard about it? And how did this even become a thing that the Remnant Church of Bible Prophecy is now, should I say, prophetically speaking, is now in bed with the UN? That is very concerning. Could you please get us to that, give us a view of that, what the history is about?
Yeah, so this is an unfolding story before us. What happened in 1985 was that in the Adventist Review on June the 6th, this version, maybe you can see it on the screen.
Yeah.
There you are.
There we go. I see it.
This was published and given out to the delegates for the General Conference session. And on the back page, page 24, so it really wasn't among the significant news. There was just an announcement that on May the 10th of 1985, the United Nations had granted the General Conference consultative NGO status at the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. There was no discussion of the process by which that decision was made. This was simply presented to the members as a fait accompli, and there didn't seem to be much fanfare about this. It was presented basically as a way, as to quoting here, "We believe the new NGO status will help the Seventh-day Adventist Church establish a presence in another forum and thus enhance its positive Christian outreach." Now, that particular article was by Dr. B.B. Beach. And this last weekend up in northern Maine, Brother Henk Viljoen, who was intimately involved in the Pearl campaign, he gave a superb summary of some of the backstory going all the way back to the founding of the United Nations, where there was an Adventist pastor and religious liberty leader from Europe who was a close friend of Eleanor Roosevelt, and he was instrumental in the establishment of the United Nations and the goals of the United Nations. This Adventist religious liberty leader from Europe, he was very much in favor of ecumenism. And we understand the context of the time. Europe had just been devastated by World War II. There was a very strong emphasis, you might say, never again kind of attitude. We don't want to go through this kind of trauma again. And so this Adventist thought leader was heavily involved with Eleanor Roosevelt in some of the philosophy behind the United Nations, and he was personally very in favor of the ecumenical movement, and he was the mentor for Dr. B.B. Beach, and after him comes Dr. Ganun Diop, as a very famous General Conference PAL leaders, public affairs and religious liberty leaders. And so the Adventist influence at the United Nations didn't start with the Consultative Status NGO approval in 1985. It goes all the way back to 1945, and it comes on the part of an Adventist leader, and his name leaves me for now. Maybe I'm sure Joanna knows his name, but he was very much involved in and supportive of the ecumenical movement. As a means or a tool to help avoid future world conflicts breaking out. So the Adventist involvement with UN goes all the way back to its very inception, and this is something that most Adventists are not aware of. And Henk Viljoen gave an excellent overview of that history in his talk up at the Augusta, Maine Religious Liberty event last week, and you can see that on Gospel Ministries International TV, GMI TV's YouTube channel.
Okay, all right. I plan on giving that one a review as well. Go ahead.
Since we're talking about history, I'd like to add something to that, if that's okay.
Yes.
When you're looking at the UN, and you look at the history of the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that's the UN, that was drafted by a committee that was chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt. And that's the part that deals with religious liberty. Now, this is the thing that I find really interesting. Eleanor Roosevelt, whatever we could talk about her interesting background personally, but when she talked about what she had done with the creation of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, it was drafted. The actual drafters were a couple of Frenchmen, and they said that they based that on the French Revolution's Declaration of Human Rights. And so what you actually have, and I started to look at it, and there are some very close connections there. And Eleanor Roosevelt and some of these drafters, they all said that that's what they had based it upon. And so when you look at what's going on at the United Nations, its roots go back to the French Revolution. It does not go back to the American Revolution. And there's a tremendous amount of spiritual implications to that.
Yeah.
The name of that Adventist leader was John Nussbaum.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. John Nussbaum, yes.
But the organization that he founded, the AIDLR, is considered a sister organization of the American one.
Civil Liberties.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'll shut up.
The one that Ganoon Diop has previously been a part of.
That's IRLA, International Religious Liberties Association.
Yeah, yes. That's it. Yes, that's it. Sorry. And currently, as far as I'm aware, the actual president of it is the former TED president. All of the lead people within that organization are Adventists. It is very much an Adventist organization, but it's ecumenical in its operations. But if you look at the 2025 General Conference session report from TED, they talk about this organization as being integral to supporting the religious liberty work within Europe. And so when you come at it from the perspective of really understanding what that organization is, even if you look at the history on their particular website, on the AIDLR website, they actually, the bit that Hank shared on his presentation, it comes from their history. It's not like it's a conspiratorial, a look at it. It says that he was good friends with the Pope, he was good friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, and the Secretary General of this organization says that he's, so honored to be a part of this organization, to follow in the footsteps of Jean Nussbaum, and that this guy's an Adventist as well. So, in fact, he is the PAL leader for the TED division as well. So, I think, we often think about this as being from an American perspective, and that's a lot of what I have presented. But this is across the globe. This association was actually founded in Geneva, part of almost trying to be, next to the UN sort of thing. This is not just America. This is Europe as well. In fact, it's across the globe. The impact of the union with the United Nations is significant. And there is actually a history that goes even back before United Nations, but in terms of them wanting to interact with the world and join with the world. It's huge.
Joanna, would you mind answering the question regarding the real reasons why the church felt the need to even partner with the UN? Because we get the announcement, okay, we are with the UN. But why? Why did you feel the need to do that? And how did they manage to even bypass this from a GC delegates vote? None of that actually happened. How did they even manage to even get that through without us even knowing about it? We only heard about the announcement.
Yeah, I think all we can go in is what they actually say. I mean, if I haven't actually read the statement by B.B. Beach, but it's almost identical to what Neil Wilson said when he announced the union as well. And so, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were thinking it was going to be helpful to the cause of Christ, but for one to think that is actually to be somewhat like the men on the borders of Canaan who thought that Christ wasn't enough to overcome the enemy. And so, unfortunately, I think it was a lack of faith in God's ability to take this church where it needed to go and to take the message where it needed to go. And they thought that they needed to rely on entities within the world to do that. Why it got through without any kind of vote or any kind of real disputing, I think the thing is that now that we have, as Conrad was just saying, we have access to this information, then those of us who probably aren't so heavily involved with the leadership can see it and are questioning it. Whereas with those who potentially were surrounding the leadership at the time that this happened, they thought it was wonderful as well. And so they didn't question it. And so I think when you start walking together with someone, you start agreeing with them. And that's not just, we start agreeing with the UN, we start agreeing with other leaders as well. When we start interacting in that sphere, we start thinking, well, they're a pretty good person. Their intentions are good. So yeah, I can't imagine why they would be doing this for nefarious reasons. It sounds like a good plan to me. But yeah, the Lord put us in a community so that we can be challenged, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that.
I'd like to add to that, Brother James, that in 2022, when Jonathan Zirkle spoke up and raised the question of can we put the vaccine mandate issue onto the agenda, Pastor Ted Wilson, he gave an 8-minute speech as to why we should not put this on the agenda. And one of the sentences he said was quite eye-opening. He said, "This was an administrative matter, and we dealt with it administratively," end quote. What he was essentially saying is that this is not in the purview of the GC in full session. If I determine that something is an administrative matter, I have the authority to go ahead and do it, but that's not something that should be discussed at the General Conference in full session. And so what you find with administrators is there is not all administrators, but there is a growing sense that once you're in office, you have administrative jurisdiction, and as long as you claim that something is administrative, there is almost nothing you need bring to the constituency for their approval, because this was an administrative matter, and my job is to take care of administration. Well, if you follow that to its logical conclusion, it would appear that almost nothing needs to come to the constituency for oversight, because everything can be claimed to be an administrative matter. And that's what Elder Wilson claimed about the reaffirmation statement. He claimed that that was just an administrative matter that was dealt with administratively. And that kind of spirit and attitude has been growing over the years among our church leaders, that basically says, my decisions are not subject to the oversight of the constituency to which I answer.
It's like a centralization of power is happening over time. Yeah. All right. I do have another segment we want to talk about now is... So what are the key requests presented in the letter to the GC? What exactly are we talking about here? It says here, we, the undersigned members in regular standing of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a request for an expedite meeting before December 19th, 2025 to request the withdrawal of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Adventist Development Relief Agency, which is ADRA, the International Liberty Association, IRLA, from the consolidative NGO status with the UN. And he went on to say, the decision by 1985 by Wilson Sr. administration to enter into a formal alliance with the UN was never made by the delegates of the General Conference session in 1985. It was simply announced to them as a fait accompli, like you've said, Dr. Vine. And then here is the claim. We believe the new NGO status will help the Seventh-day Adventist Church establish a presence in another forum and thus enhance its positive Christian outreach. Now, my next question is for Tim Rumsey. Have we seen evidence of that? Has the goal been accomplished? Do you have anything that shows maybe the opposite is happening? Have we actually gotten to a point where we are, extending our positive Christian outreach?
Well, I'd like to first, I'm going to try to share my screen here.
Okay,
go
ahead.
I would like to first share a statement from the Spirit of Prophecy.
Okay.
In regards to Solomon, his history, he made the same mistake. And we don't need to surmise about why necessarily. Back in 1985, as well as much more recently, the reason given to the church has been that this will help our mission and allow us access to people and places that we wouldn't have otherwise, presumably. So just one paragraph here from Prophets and Kings, page 53. Solomon reasoned that political and commercial alliances with the surrounding nations would bring these nations to a knowledge of the true God. And he entered into unholy alliance with nation after nation. Often alliances were sealed by marriages with heathen princesses. The commands of Jehovah were set aside for the customs of surrounding peoples. In a nearby paragraph, she writes, and I'm paraphrasing, but she's saying how foolish it was for Solomon to assume that by disobeying or breaking God's law himself, he could lead the nations around him to reverence and respect the law of God and become disciples of God. So, unfortunately, we see a parallel here with the mistake that Solomon made. So, your question, James, was in regards to the effect that this alliance has had on the church. And so I'm going to skip to another section of my slideshow here. These are the requirements, part of the requirements for any NGO that is in consultative status under ECOSOC. Article 2 of this document says the aims and purposes of the organization shall be in conformity with the spirit, purposes, and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And paragraph 3 says the organization shall undertake to support the work of the United Nations and to promote knowledge of its principles and activities in accordance with its own aims and purposes and the nature and scope of its competence and activities. So, in other words, when you become a consultative member of ECOSOC with the United Nations, you are promising that you will take the agendas and the principles and the purposes of the United Nations and communicate those and distribute those to the people within your realm of influence. And, there's been a lot of attention placed in the last several months here on the official statements. We've already mentioned them in this conversation. And as we look at those statements carefully, there are several that directly mention or invoke the United Nations itself by name, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are others that don't mention those institutions or organs by name, but they clearly support the principles and the spirit of those various organizations and the documents that they put out. United Nations seems to be very fond of celebrating special years and things like this. In 1995, there was the Year of Tolerance, for example. And so a lot of these statements have tied in with these special years, special events, and a comparison of those, the official statements with what we see happening globally within the United Nations. There's a lot of parallels there. And I don't know how many of these you want to look at more closely, James, but
okay. Well, let's take at least 3 of them to see as far as evidence, because one of the things we are hearing is the UN is not in prophecy. Those statements don't really mean much. So if you don't mind sharing that, I do have another article here that was published just a few days ago after the letter was sent, and it's from Religious Liberty TV. And the argument is that it says, Church at Crossroad, why Adventist engagement with the UN deserves a careful study, not sudden exit. And the author of the article is arguing similar. It's just religious liberty. We are just ADRA and IRLA and their relationship with the UN is only for the purpose of religious liberty and meeting the needs of the people who are vulnerable and stuff like that. And that's the end of that story. How do we respond to that?
Well, here's an example. In 1995, this was the Year of Tolerance by the United Nations. So we issued a official statement titled Tolerance, in which we endorse the efforts of the United Nations as well as all of the supporting documents. And I don't have them all here on this slideshow, but the primary document released by the United Nations about the Year of Tolerance itself cited probably several dozen additional documents, previous documents that it was built upon. And you start looking closely at those. Some of them are quite troubling because tolerance is based on a common good understanding, this idea that whatever is best for the community is what will be protected. And if the community deems that someone's free speech or other types of activities, religious or otherwise, aren't best for the common good, then all of a sudden all of your rights disappear. And perhaps I don't know if we'll get to a closer look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in this conversation, but at the end of the document in Article 29, it specifically states all of these rights that are supposedly protected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They are only to be protected if the person exercising those rights is doing that in order to comply or support with the principles of the United Nations. So, the message is pretty clear that as long as you are claiming your rights or exercising them in a way that harmonizes with the principles of the United Nations, you'll be protected. But if you don't, every single one of those rights, including religious liberty, is stripped away. Some of these statements, I don't think we would necessarily have a problem with. Smoking and ethics, there's some good things that are said in many of these statements. The question that keeps coming up is, why did we find it necessary to make this particular statement now? For instance, there was a World Health Assembly initiative at the exact same time in 1996 when this was released that was also talking about tobacco control. As far as I know, our church has always been against smoking. We've had a health message, and I would say there is a difference between a health message and a health emphasis. We've had a health message, since we almost began. 1863 was Ellen White's health vision. And why did we find it necessary in that exact year, 1996, to finally make an official statement in regards to smoking? A similar one with family violence. Again, I think we would probably agree with virtually everything that's written in that official statement, but why did we need to issue it in the same year that there was a UN resolution trying to eliminate violence against women? So we can see evidence that we are indeed complying with the requirements of being a member of ECOSOC, and that is that we're taking the agendas and the initiatives of the United Nations, and we are redistributing them in our own words.
All right. Thank you for that.